Tisha, thanks, Casey. Happy New Year. Someone said that to me yesterday, and I thought, no, the person asked me, how were your holidays? I was like, holidays? Isn't it August? This has been a tough 3 weeks. We really appreciate you all being here. And I think for me, when I look at the language of the labor and the land acknowledgement, they sit even more heavily on my heart. And so I'm very proud to work for and represent a county who begins all of our county functions with these acknowledgements. The LA County Board of Supervisors recognizes that we occupied land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. The Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of LA County. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. We are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments, including the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, the Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, Quiche Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and the San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. To learn more about the First Peoples of LA County, please visit the LA City County Native American Commission website, and the website is there on the screen. So again, welcome everyone, and wanted to let you know that we are also live streaming today. We had a number of people reach out who RSVP'd for a variety of reasons, couldn't get here. So we thank you, team, for making the live stream available kind of last minute. So we know that all the information that's going to be shared today is so valuable, particularly now that we wanted to make sure that people had access. It's hard to believe that we are now entering our 4th year of our monthly RJLE, our Racial Justice Learning Exchange experiences. How many of you that this is your first RJLE? If you just let us know. Fabulous. So what's so powerful about that is every month, easily a half of the people who attend are new. That's really important to us. These aren't designed or curated to be events with hundreds or thousands of people. It's not designed that way. These are important learning spaces where we can spend time unpacking bias and replacing it with new information. And that's not easily done in large settings with lots of people. So these are curated with you in mind, our department heads, our county boards and commission appointees, and members of the SD2 community. So we really appreciate you being here. Before we begin the program, given what we've all have and are continuing to experience, I'd like to ask that you join me in a moment of silence for our fellow Angelenos who have tragically lost their lives, our fellow Angelenos who have lost homes and businesses as a result of the recent fires. So if you'd please join me for a moment. I thank you for that. As I know all of you do, we continue to extend our thoughts and our prayers and our commitment towards action to all of those who have been impacted by this disaster. And needless to say, I want you to know that the county will continue to work tirelessly to make sure that our family, friends, and neighbors who've been victimized by the fire have access to resources and information, and our creative collective thinking about how we recover and then rebuild. You know, again, RGLE is an initiative that not only allows us to reflect on our shared commitment to inclusion, but it also challenges us to, again, as I said, confront our own bias, to own it and confront it, and engage in meaningful dialogue and work towards eliminating structural racism. And this month's discussion on financial literacy is especially timely as we reflect on the challenges faced by the community and the significant loss of generational wealth, Black generational wealth in Altadena. I encourage you all to read an LA Times letter to the editor that was penned by my former seatmate in the State Assembly, Assemblywoman Susan Bonilla. It ran, I want to say the 9th, I'll double check on the date. It was right at the beginning of the fires, and it beautifully reflects on her direct experience as a resident of Altadena, having purchased, her parents having purchased their first home, and she as a young adult purchasing her first home, and the rich heritage and the generations of stories. She talks about her household being a white Latino household and how they were warmly embraced by their African-American neighbors. And she talks about her expectations of her fellow elected colleagues about what we do to preserve that heritage and help build back in a meaningful way that honors that heritage and protects it. As some of you may or may not know, Altadena is a beloved community in unincorporated LA County, full of rich history, generations of stories, and a deep cultural heritage. Pat Harvey did a story on last night's 11 p.m. news, and it repeated this morning on CBS, where she gave some amazing statistics that at one point, 40% of Altadena's population was African American. Currently, 81% of the African American population in Altadena are homeowners. And I don't know of any other community, I'd love to be proven wrong, across the state of California that has today that level of African American home ownership. And so it's important that we recognize that and support it. It's been an area of resilience and pride, and yet we must acknowledge the painful reality that Black families have lost homes that they owned for generations, and Black businesses have witnessed their legacies diminished. These losses are not just individual, but collective, impacting the entire community and reminding us of the urgent need to uplift the contributions that have shaped Altadena into the vibrant community that we all know. Altadena is front of mind and on our heart today, but what you're going to hear today is a reflection of a long history of structural racism that has led to complications for people of color and Black people to purchase home, and structural racism that has led to the loss in significant numbers of home ownership and property, particularly by African Americans. And so today's book club conversation provides us with the opportunity to reflect on the work required to move forward while acknowledging that overcoming structural racism and its lasting effects will not happen overnight. And I believe each of us has a role to play and that ongoing effort. As my chief of staff loves to say, our book club throws no shame or shade. If you haven't read the book, not a problem. I would argue after you hear today's panel, you go run out there and try to grab those last 8 books because it is amazing. It's rich with data and history that I think is going to be relevant for all of us as we move forward to not only survive the next 4 years, but figure out how we are going to thrive, because that is owed to us, right? So with that, we acknowledge the amazing space we are in. I am so proud of all the community college in the 2nd District. All of them are thriving and building and expanding and working hard to educate our current workforce and our next and emerging generation of leaders. Please welcome LA Southwest College President, Dr. Culpepper to provide some opening remarks. Appreciate you.
Thank you so very much, Supervisor Mitchell. It is certainly a pleasure to be able to host this event today at Southwest College. If you allow me just for a few moments, I just want to just recognize the sensitivity that Supervisor Mitchell just shared concerning the impact that the fires have had on the African American and Latino community. Altadena is a home to me. I live there. My wife grew up there and lived there. Our family lost structures during the fire as well. But it's certainly something that causes me to have deep reflection as it pertains to today and its relevancy to Southwest College. You know, I look at Altadena and I see a phoenix. I see a community that will rise from the flames. It will be renewed. It will be regenerated. And that community will be stronger than it was before. And that is my hope, and that is certainly my prayer, and that is the confidence I have in the people who are there, who are resilient, as it has been for many generations. And so keep positive thoughts, not only going toward Altadena, but all the other communities that have been affected by the fires. The relevancy of that is that Southwest College, since 1967 and its creation, came out of a tragic event when the Watts riots occurred. There was many burnings and all kinds of other tragedies that went on during that time, but something positive came out of it. Like a phoenix, once again, this college was established by Odessa Cox and the other community activists who wanted to see higher education in this community and other types of services. Since that time, Southwest College has continued to thrive and to be here, generation after generation after generation. When many may have thought that Southwest College would close and shut down, it's now 2025, and we are still here. We are still here. And so on behalf of our Chancellor, Chancellor Roman, Dr. Roman, and our President of our board, Trustee Eno, Dr. Eno, and certainly on behalf of the faculty, the staff, and the administration here at Southwest College, we welcome you to the home of the Cougars. While we speak about education, financial education here and how it impacted a particular community, understand that Southwest College is a place of learning. This is a place of higher learning. Let all the myths of what it means to come to a community college go away, because the same 60 units that you can get here and pay almost nothing to get those 60 units on your transcript are the same 60 units you'll be taking at any university across the country. You get your first 2 years here almost free, all right? And you take those 2 years, you transfer them into a four-year institution, and you finish your last 2 years at that four-year institution. So we're talking about fiscal literacy. Parents, don't believe the hype. The first 2 years here is higher education. As you experience today, during this program and this workshop, I am so thankful for the panelists that have come to share knowledge, because knowledge is power. If we're talking about changing generations, the affluency of generations and the affluency of a people is going to take knowledge. It's going to take information. And the information that you're receiving today, the knowledge that you're receiving today will help you change lives. And remember, if you haven't thought about going back to college and maybe you feel like you're a little more mature than others, there's never a better time than today. Welcome to Southwest College.
Dr. Culpepper, thank you for saying that about parents don't believe the hype. We were having a conversation internally with our team about an education is simply a business transaction. It's not warm and fuzzy like picking a puppy. It isn't, right? Like, you look at the reputation of the institution, they agree to educate your young person, and in turn, you pay them some sum of money, and that could be by way of scholarship and everything. And so we look at the challenges of our community and how much student debt African American young people are holding, which inhibits them for buying their first home and everything, which is the cornerstone of building wealth. So that point, when you connect the dots, is so important. Secondly, when we think about the book, The Color of Money, a lot of times when some of the individuals have been asking me about it, they were thinking it was self-help, what to do, how do I do this? And I'm reminded when, those books are helpful, I don't want to throw any shade on that, but that saying about if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, is really important as you look at this book and as we discuss it today. I was telling our guest this morning, a little while ago, is that like the influence of Nixon, Ms. Baradaran, about how much he was in the background being so nefarious. And so what we know about him was a lot less than what you pulled out in the book. So I appreciate that clarity because there's so much stuff that goes behind the scene that has a significant impact. So Professor, when you talk about this book, what inspired you, because it's a detailed historical background, what inspired you to write the book and in the way that you did?
Thank you for that question. I did not intend actually to write a book about black-owned banks at all. My first book was called How the Other Half Banks, and I was trying to explain that the sort of way that I saw the banking industry on Wall Street. I was at a Wall Street law firm from 2005 until 2010. Those were times where the entire world was in one paradigm, and then the financial crisis happens, and then we're all of a sudden in another one. And having sort of a front row seat as an attorney, I just realized that so many of the things that we believe about the market, about money, about banking were myths, that the reality is that the banks and the government are sort of working together, and the law is much more important than is the market in a lot of ways. And so my first book was that, and then I intended to write, sort of look at the people and the banks outside of the mainstream, those excluded from the mainstream. The question was, can you build wealth if you are not plugged in to the levers of power? If the government isn't giving you subsidies and your bank's money, how can you create wealth? And so I intended to look at immigrant banks and a lot of these other banks, but as I started researching, the story was, wow. I mean, look at what's happened here. And I let the book go where it takes me, and it took me to the Nixon files eventually, because I wanted to tell a simple story that had to do with writ large banking. I wanted to explain to the white policymakers, that was my audience, right? Yeah. The things that you're doing are not helping because you don't understand the money structure. And what it turned into was a more nefarious, a harder story to tell, which is that not only is it difficult to grow wealth when you're outside of it, it's much more difficult when race is used as a weapon to break up, one, class sort of solidarity, and two, when it's used as a weapon when you have these racial myths so pervasive in the system that when the black community does grow wealth, it is met with violence. Mm-hmm. And so at every corner, and then, or when there's a little bit of progress, you get a massive backlash and accusations of, oh, well, they're special favorites of the law. I mean, this was 20 years after enslavement, where black men were being lynched. There's no justice in the South. The Supreme Court basically cuts off the civil rights laws at the time.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. Hold on.
Okay.
We're going to get there.
Okay. Well, I was going to bring it to today. But just to say, it's like history rhymes in a way that it's just shocking. You're like, what is special?
It does repeat. Absolutely.
Okay, pause.
Absolutely.
Next time.
You mentioned in the book about 400 of the wealthiest whites have the same wealth as all blacks in America. Mm-hmm. And something else recently said that there are about 1,000 wealthiest whites in America are equal to the wealth of all black and Latinos in this country. So 1,000 people have equal wealth as well. So in the book, we talk about the wealth gap and how it's caused by slavery. And Dennis has done a lot of research in that. And we know that slave bodies were the asset. And I think the dollar amount was like that slavery, the equity of slavery was about $3 billion then. All right. So for all the economic gains, and it's created by the slavery and the slaves themselves, they would never profit. So when we're thinking about that, there were a lot of pillars in the book that you talked about, the obstacles. Mm-hmm. Dennis, first I wanted you to talk a little bit about kind of like the connection between slavery and the wealth gap and where we are right now. And then let's talk about the principles that are outlined in the book.
Sure. Thank you, Fredericka, and thank you for having me. I'd like to thank my dear friend for more than 30 years, Supervisor Mitchell, who I've known all the way since she was a staffer for Senator Watson, Diane Watson, and I was a staffer at the Capitol as well. I want to also thank Dr. Culpepper for having such a wonderful campus for us all to come to and to join each other and speak. Don't believe the hype for real. I'm a kid of community college. I attended just about every community college in San Diego. And when I graduated from Cal State Fullerton, they recognized all those credits.
That's right, that's right, that's right.
And when I finished in the top 10% of my class at Howard University School of Law, all those credits were recognized as well. So, Fredericka used the term assets, and I want to make sure everybody knows what that means. We know about the history of slavery, but we didn't know as much as we know today, and we really didn't start to know until maybe 2000. Starting in 2000, several cities, including like Chicago and Philadelphia and other places, required anybody doing business with those cities to disclose any of their past history and experience with slavery. Several banks, including J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, were required for the first time to admit what their involvement had been in slavery. So understand when you use the term asset what that means. For example, your ancestors were used as collateral by plantation owners if you're black in this country. When Master defaulted on his plantation, your ancestors were foreclosed upon. So J.P. Morgan admitted that in their history, banks that they acquired or owned had more than 13,000 slaves used as collateral to secure debts by rich, wealthy white people. And when they failed on those debts, they took possession of more than 1,200 slaves and resold them to pay for those debts. So when you walk into those banks, that is the history you're dealing with, a history that only really has come to light over the last quarter of a century. So naturally, when the banking industry and credit and home ownership are so central to the generation of wealth by all people in this country, you are going to have a gap because white folk and the majority have a big head start on us. And what we're going to talk about today is how we bridge that gap.
Thank you, yeah, absolutely. Professor, you lay out like 4 or 5 different like barriers, challenges of obtaining wealth and things like that, and credit. Mm-hmm. How are some of those things that you lay out in your book are playing out in real life today?
Yeah, you know, as Mr. Dennis was saying about assets, you know, if you look at what is an asset, what is capital, who gets to define these things? And it is the lawmakers, okay? So the law gets to say, so land wasn't always property until the 1600s in England, where the law said, now you can sell this thing. A human being wasn't property until we have the slave trade. So the law says what is property, what is a contract, and what kind of property right will be enforced or not enforced. So when the law is white supremacist, as it was in the southern United States, as was woven into the Constitution through the compromise of the South and the North, the law says human beings are capital and debt and labor, by the way. So it was an immensely profitable institution. And then, so you have this, the law and the lawmakers in this institution of slavery. And what is the institution of slavery for? It's for profit, obviously, but it's more than that. You know, there was, you know, our number one export as a country was cotton, and the cotton prices had to be very, very low because they were all going to the British Empire to make the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution was fed by cotton grown by American slaves that had to be very, very cheap in order for everyone to make money. It wasn't just the southern plantation owners and the oligarchs, it was also the northern industrialists, and it was the British Empire that was just stacking gold, and the French, and, you know, getting their slave riches as well. And so when that goes away during the Civil War, that particular legal structure, the British still need cotton. The Industrial Revolution is still going. And so what happens, and W.E.B. Du Bois talks about this in Black Reconstruction, is there's this 8-year interregnum where maybe the slaves are going to get land after, you know, there's a 40 acres that was part of the Freedmen's Bureau bill, and it gets vetoed. Why? Yes, white supremacy, but more market demand. The British needed their cheap cotton, and if you get land, like the slaves did in Haiti, when the Haitian Revolution happened, they took the land and they stopped growing sugar. And the sugar prices, what happens when you have less sugar? Higher prices. And so the market in sugar halted, and the market in cotton could not do that. Everyone would lose money in Wall Street. And so what do? You recreate slavery through a system of debt called sharecropping. And that lasts until, you know, the Great Migration, 1910, 1920. So it is, yes, there's freedom. You know, Frederick Douglass says there's no such thing as freedom without wealth and land. And he was right. Because when you don't have political power, the laws are going to be against you. And so that's what happened. Jim Crow comes in. Instead of the slave laws, you have Jim Crow and heavy regulation of labor. What was Jim Crow but you can't do anything but grow cotton or do labor for the white man. Loitering is punished.
Yeah, so the through line is capitalism.
The through line is power. Well, either way, it's like if you don't have power, then you can't make laws, then you can't make money. If the power structure is against you, then how do you grow wealth? Because wealth and power are coterminous things. There's no such thing as a market outside of the lawmaking levers. Mm-hmm. So those who have control of the power structure gets to say not just who can make wealth, but what is wealth itself.
Mm-hmm. We see, and Dennis, you see this a lot in some of your litigation, and you have right now are suing Wells Fargo. And talk to us a little bit about that challenge of African Americans obtaining capital, and then some of the nefarious. We'll get a little bit in a little while about the 2008 subprime loan part of it, but share with us about these particular pieces of it, having a hard time getting the capital and what banks are doing to make that even more difficult.
Well, naturally, and I think most people recognize this, but we have to start from the foundation that home ownership remains the American dream. Mm-hmm. And what is the real American dream? It's freedom. Mm-hmm. And so if we are to be free, you must have economic freedom as part of that. And home ownership is what allows you to build that economic freedom. It is collateral. It allows you to have a debt structure. It allows you to acquire money and capital to meet your individual personal needs, but also to invest and move forward, right? The current president of the United States claims that he got $1 million loan, small $1 million loan, small, from his father, and he ran that into being a billionaire. He did that by owning properties, and whether you believe he's a billionaire or not, he did have his name on title to that property. If you do not have property to leverage into creating wealth for your family and generational wealth, it is going to be a problem. From the history of this country through redlining and other mechanisms and the subprime crisis that we'll talk about, minorities overall, and African Americans in particular, have had a very difficult time in acquiring that property that would provide what? The American dream, home ownership, and economic freedom. And that has happened by institutionalized discrimination and racism, going back all the way to the Homeowners Loan Corporation that itself graded loans from A to D based on the area, and literally part of the government redlined areas such that we were not allowed to live there. And so as property values went up and they passed from family to family and generation to generation, we did not benefit of that. In my Wells Fargo case, Attorney Ben Crump is one of our co-counsels on the case, and he talks about the trillions of dollars. We're talking about trillions of dollars that the black community and the minority communities have missed out on by having discriminatory policies placed on us that have prevented us from home ownership. My lawsuit against Wells Fargo relates to one of the worst of all. We all are aware how low interest rates were at the start of the pandemic and COVID. Some 30-year mortgages were at 2.6%. In 2020, Bloomberg published an article, and I verified it through my lawsuit. Wells Fargo denied more than half of the black folk that applied to them to refinance their homes. They only approved 47% of refinances. Do you understand what that means? They already owned their home. They were already paying on it. All they wanted to do was take advantage of the lower interest rates that would have reduced their mortgage payments. And instead of approving those loans, that would have made it more certain that they would have paid off their mortgages and been able to pass it on to their next of kin, Wells Fargo denied half of them to keep them in what? Higher interest, higher mortgage loans. We, as part of our lawsuit, will make them be held accountable.
Thank you for that. There is this belief that, and it's true, 60% of black people are unbanked or underbanked. And there's a general belief that black folks have mistrust of the banking industry, and not that that's improperly placed. So talk to us a little bit about the Freedmen's Bank and that history and where some of this first mistrust began.
Yeah, so the Freedmen's Bank is a really good example of, the government taking away the rights of black freedmen by that land that they were owed, not just because they had worked it for hundreds of years, but because the treasonous Southern Confederates had, should be punished, right? That was kind of like, what should we do? How do we punish the treason? And instead they got their land back. And instead of land, the freedmen and women got a bank. And the way the bank was sold was you don't earn land, you didn't earn this free gift, but you can earn your land by saving up. Saving up, by the way, during the heavy sharecropping, like very, very difficult to save money in a debt system like sharecropping. Yet, the freed slaves took to this bank and invested, put all their money in it. And the bank was created by the Union, like the good guys. Lincoln signed it into law. It's the first national bank there is, because at this time there's no Federal Reserve, nothing like that. But it's not backed by the federal government. It's just supposed to be this like glorified piggy bank. No loans, no mortgages. And people brought the money in, and it became like $1.5 billion in today's money. And the white head of the bank, this guy named Henry Cook, his brother is Jay Cook, this infamous speculator, he gave that money to his brother to speculate away in railroad bonds and lost it. And it never came back. Like these depositors, their money was just gone. And the bank had put, the insignia of the government on there. This was like Lincoln and Grant. So everyone thought that it was going to be backed by the government. The government would come in and protect the money, and it didn't. And I was looking at, banker memoirs into the 1960s, 1950s, where people were saying, don't trust a bank. And it was valid, because that was not, it was like the 1880s when that bank is failed. That's your grandparents, right? They're saying, don't trust a bank. That is valid reasoning, right? And a lot of black banks had to deal with that legacy as they set up. So almost quickly, right after the Freedman Bank fails, there's a lot of black banks that pop up. Remember, white banks weren't serving black customers. They were absolutely no loans, no deposits. So if you're going to do anything, banking, a lot of other services came up in this way, funeral services, whatever. White institutions refused to do it. So those were the early banks, and they couldn't even get the trust of their community because the community was just so distrustful of banks. So it took many years for that, and that still remains and is very much valid. You don't trust because they're untrustworthy because of this, Wells Fargo thing. But banks they do grow money. If you get a loan from a bank, you can leverage that and create wealth. And so this is what I mean by laws and power directing wealth to certain people and not others.
Right.
Okay, so even redlining, as he brought up, it was the idea of risk itself, the way that we measure mortgages now, loan to value ratios, what is like, how much is a property value, that race is embedded in there. So a home is worth less because it is a black home. You can be in a white neighborhood, and there's many studies on this, an appraisal can come in and see the black family pictures and appraise it at like almost $200,000 less, right? But writ large, if it's a black neighborhood, it's worth less.
Right.
And that pre-existed redlining, but redlining really cemented that. So this, again, like values and property tied in with those embedded racism inside the value.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about the mistrust, there sometimes is an assumption then that African American families don't save, don't produce, because they don't have a bank to put it in, that they don't trust it. But actually studies have shown that blacks actually save at a higher rate of their income, although it's lower, income is lower than white families, correct?
Well, imagine stealing money from a population, stealing their time and money and oppressing them for hundreds of years and then blaming them for their own poverty. I mean, that's what this book is meant to address, is like, it's insane unless you realize what this is. It's like if you keep taking money, if you keep extracting and you keep robbing, and then you're blaming people for their own poverty when you have explicitly, right, taken the wealth and looted those communities. Even just the term looting, right? The private equity firms have been looting black neighborhoods. Wells Fargo has been looting black neighborhoods for a long time. But when you look at like what's a looter, that's when you go into CVS and take money, rather than systematic looting.
Coming from one community,
Yes.
going after one community.
Absolutely.
We know that several government programs like the GI Bill and FHA loans were the pathway for many white families to acquire wealth, especially post Second World War. Say that fast 3 times, right? And we know that many black families were cut out of that, whether they served in the war or not. Let's talk about, Dennis, I'll have you talk about some of the case law that has prevented blacks from accessing some of those programs. And then, Professor, will you talk to us a little bit about how a family was prevented from getting that FHA loan or not accessing the GI Bill?
Sure, I'll start. One of the challenges in our lawsuit against Wells Fargo is that each person who applied for a loan at Wells Fargo has been hurt at some level that is what some people would consider to be a nominal amount, maybe a couple $1,000s, maybe $5,000. And so we have to bring a lawsuit as a class action. We have to kind of pool everybody together, because it doesn't make sense for any one person or for, in our case, to be clear, during this 4-year period of time from 2018 to 2022, Wells Fargo denied 328,000 minorities various home loan products, either origination, refinance, HELOC, all during the period of time when interest rates were dropping. What we did was we started looking at how can we deal with cases such as like Teamsters. There's a case called Teamsters, and there's the Teamsters method of trying to find a discriminatory act and say that that discriminatory act is hurting everybody equally. And you have to find a policy, and you have to be able to show that this policy is hurting the same people equally, and then you have to apply that into cases like Comcast versus Bearhand and other case law that says that, okay, we have all of the elements required by the Federal Rule of Civil Procedure, Rule 23. I know these are a lot of terms, but think about it like this. Everybody has to be hurt equally. If you're not hurt equally and you've been hurt more, or we can't determine how you've been hurt the same as we can to the person sitting next to you, then you can't bring a class action. So unfortunately, because of that law, out of that 328,000 people that were denied loans by Wells Fargo during this period of time that we're trying to certify our class action, we can only really focus on 119,000. Here's why. Fredericka talked about this, and Professor Baradaran talks about this. There were government programs set up to help minorities and to help the banks. Guaranteed home loans through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA. Here's the point. 119,000 people during this 4-year period of time were approved by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA in terms of their credit. And Wells Fargo still denied them a home loan. Do you understand what that means? Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac were going to guarantee that loan. So if you defaulted, the bank still got paid. They still did not give you a loan. That is the problem. And we've narrowed the class, leaving forsaken in some ways 109,000 people, which I'm certain some of them folks have a case. Black folk pay their bills. We pay our home loans. Fredericka was talking about saving. There's not a person in this room that doesn't know a black person that has some money in a Crown Royal bag or a coffee can somewhere in their house.
That part.
Amen. And so that's the reality of what we're dealing with. That's the challenges of what we face. And the reality of it is that the law can only do so much. It's the good work of people like Supervisor Mitchell and others that are going to have to deal with this issue. It benefits us all.
Professor Baradaran,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the FHA loans, but also about how you package loans, which what got us to the subprime market.
Okay. So in 1934, after this talk, maybe you should go, if you have time, on this website called Mapping Inequality by richmond.edu. And they had the original maps. You can look up Los Angeles. It does it for every county. And look up Los Angeles. Look at a current black neighborhood and find the map that they did in 1934. It's the same racial makeup. Here's why. They went around the country mapping every little district and saying how risky was it. And you can see in the comments what they said. And it's really eye-opening because they will say things like this. This is a black neighborhood and therefore it's risky. This is a low-class Mexican neighborhood. This is inharmonious races. They are so explicit that race is the #1 reason that they're using. Here's why that's important. So this is the start of the middle class in America. It's not that middle class people got mortgages. It's if you got a mortgage, you got to be middle class. That's when it starts in 1934, after the Great Depression. Everyone's living in a tenement in Manhattan, so I'm from New York. So $50 you're paying in rent, and then the white family gets to move to Levittown, Pennsylvania, or some suburb, pay $35 on a mortgage, build equity, and the black family gets to stay in the city and pay more in rent because the resources are gone. The buses now are just the city where everyone else is doing cars. What does that affect? It's your schools, right? Which neighborhoods are policed? Which neighborhoods are the environmental disasters laden? And the way that this was enforced, so 1934 is those maps, and literally the FHA just would not guarantee a loan in a red line neighborhood because they were black. And it wasn't out, because they were not just like KKK people. These were it was risky. Back then, there was race science that the Nazis ended up using, that said that certain people were inferior. I mean, this was just deeply scientific at the time. Okay, so science was also infected with this. And the way that developers would get loans from the FHA is they would have to build a wall. So there's a couple, one in St. Louis and one in Detroit, where a white neighborhood got too close to a black neighborhood, so they built a wall so that they could get FHA loans. And every house that was sold from 1934 until 1970, and it was malpractice not to include it, had a thing called a racial covenant, which is part of the contract that said in it very explicitly, you may not sell this house to anyone who's not white Caucasian. Okay, that was it until the Supreme Court stopped enforcing it in 1970. 1970. Okay, so that built the middle class. You look at Orange County. Orange County is a creation of white flight and the FHA. So you look at the topography of the nation, right? Where PPP loans. Who got PPP loans? Where are the environmental disasters? Look at the school district funding. Where is it over police? Where George Floyd was killed? That was a red line neighborhood. Altadena, I'm sure, was a red line neighborhood. And you track those to today, and those exist. So you actually don't even have to go back to slavery. Now, the myths that caused the racism that caused the New Deal to happen that way do go back to racism. Because when you have an entire economic structure built on a myth of racial hierarchy, and then you get rid of the structure, but you don't get rid of the myths, those myths recreate that same racial hierarchy in new means. And that's where we're at. That's why we're canceling DEI. Because you've got 20 guys that are hoarding the nation's wealth, and who are they blaming? The DEI offices? That they are the ones creating the unfairness of this rigged economy? Are you kidding me? That it's the black people's fault? That Elon Musk has more money than he and his children and great-great-grandchildren, his money is growing faster. This is how capital works. His money is growing faster than he can ever spend it. That's how capital works, okay? So that's not fair. And he is saying this economy is not fair. Why? Because women and minorities are getting ahead of the line. And the implication is that he got there as a meritocracy, that it's a meritocracy that we live in. That's how deep this stuff goes. It's ugly. The stuff that's coming out right now is old race science stuff. I mean, this was stuff that should have been buried with the Nazis, but turns out the Nazis weren't buried because they're back too.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. We talk about the FHA loan, and folks would like to say we're in this post-racial environment because Barack Obama was elected to be president. And one thing you point out is that would there have been a president, Barack Obama, if it had not been for his white grandparents who got to take advantage of, in Kansas, the GI Bill, his grandfather, and buying a home with the FHA loan to stabilize him, right? Like, we've had those conversations, right? So people think about that, and we talk about what happened and how you accumulate that wealth. The number that is shocking, it should shock all of us. When you wrote the book, it was $11,000 was the average wealth of a black family. 117,000 was a white family. Now, it is 17,000 is the average for a black family, and 176,000 is the average wealth for a white family. So let's talk about the 2008 Great Depression and how loans are packaged and why they, and either one of you can ask this question, why it was more profitable to sell a subprime loan than to sell someone a loan that their credit was worthy of.
Do you want to take this?
So it's somewhat complicated, but the way I'll put it is this: is there was this. I'm sure you heard this term, mortgage-backed securities, and so there were securities that were backed by real property loans, so to speak, and there was kind of a influx or a feeling of Congress that we should try to create greater home ownership. So let's help the banks and push them to make loans. And some banks did that through improper predatory tactics, Wells Fargo being probably the worst one of them. All of a sudden, a new term arose called reverse redlining, meaning that we targeted neighborhoods that were historically redlined to keep minorities in their place, and we pushed them there. We went after those people and asked them to take loans, buy houses, in many cases knowing, the banks did, that they weren't favorable loans. They had too high interest rates, they didn't require a down payment, they didn't require sufficient down payments.
Many were refinances.
And refinances were many of them. Countrywide was a big proponent of that. And then they had a debt-to-income ratio that was inappropriate, or more importantly, a loan-to-value that was inappropriate. Wells Fargo, when they got actually sued by the federal government for their activities during the subprime mortgage crisis, documents start coming out where they recognized what they were doing. Almost unbelievable that you could see this in modern society. They called the loans that they were selling and forcing upon these people as ghetto loans. They said they were being delivered to mud people. They did all of that in a way that was so pronounced that they are one of the reasons why we had the economic turmoil we had during that period of time. Loans failed, and banks started to fail. And when they did, the federal government couldn't let them fail, bailed them out with money that went to those banks to prop them up. Programs were cut. People complained about whatever welfare or any other program you might realize and being necessary to help the vestiges of discrimination and racism and slavery. And instead, that money gave all these banks a fresh start. And you would think, as my mama would say, sometimes the only excuse is, boy, I'll never do that again. That they would have learned their lesson. But here we are, back again. And in 2022, Wells Fargo paid $2.9 billion to the Consumer Protection and Financial Bureau for bad, inappropriate, predatory loan tactics. And now, to the people I represent, they're going to have to pay some more billions. And the sad part of it is like, I'm not sure they're ever going to get their lesson. They're going to say, we didn't do that. They're going to give some money to T.D. Jakes and say, look how we like black folk. They're going to find some other city somewhere that has a black mayor and give them some money for that person that would take it. And they was going to say again,
Snoop.
look at all my black friends. But until there's real change that begins at grassroots levels like this, it won't change at all.
And as a result of that, thank you, 53% of black wealth was lost during the 2008 crash. 53% of black wealth. Last question, because I want to give a little time for some questions from the audience. Professor, there's this comment that it would take 228 years for blacks to catch up to the wealth gap. And you strongly disagree with that. Tell us why.
Because the engines that perpetuate the wealth gap, i.e. white supremacy and the system of racism, Wells Fargo won't learn their lesson because they're profitable year after year after year. When they paid that $2.9 billion fine, their stock price rose the next day. When JP Morgan paid $5 billion, trillion dollars or something, some ridiculous amount to the DOJ for a justice suit, their stock price rose. Okay? So capital's got to grow. Okay? And so when capital grows and it's based on a system of racism, it doesn't go the other way. It just grows in one direction. Capital grows that way and poverty grows this way. So there's not 200 years. We're not getting closer to closing it. Okay? So when you're not getting closer, those lines just keep diverging because there's a new financial instrument. There's a new hustle every time, right? There's a new, they went after the mortgage loans in the redlined areas because Wall Street needed yield spread premiums. Capital is a hungry ghost. It needs growth. And what we did in the 1990s is we unleashed the potential for growth. It used to be that a mortgage was capped at 6%. Now you've got mortgages like unlimited interest rates. We took the usury caps off in the 1970s. We took the caps off on all this. So capital can now grow fast. And so it's like the worldwide cotton market wanted low cotton prices. The worldwide debt market wanted any loans at high yield. And where do you get the riskiest loans? In the places where you can go find people who've never had homes, right? So exclusion leads to exploitation and then is profits year after year. And so when they made those billions of dollars of profits and then they lost them, the government came in and gave them 100 cents on the dollar. And when they tried, Barack Obama had a tiny little program inside the massive TARP deal that was to help homeowners. The Tea Party grew out of that. They were like, oh, these, irresponsible people, they'd leveraged themselves. Mind you, the banks had leveraged themselves 1 to 20, right? And that's not irresponsibility because it's a corporation, It's like that's what they do. Shareholders got to get fed. But people, the blame goes on them. So I think as long as these structures are in place, it doesn't close. However, it could close very fast if reverse structures were placed. It's just because it hasn't closed in the past and it doesn't look to be closing doesn't mean it can't, but you got to go to the root. You have to understand it. That's part of what this book is about, is we're not even trying, right? So, the prognosis is not good at this moment because we don't understand the disease. But if we understand the disease, then we can treat it. But it goes to the root.
Absolutely, thank you. Time for some questions. Kalila, where'd she go that fast? There you are. Some questions from the audience for our esteemed panel. Them, not me.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian. I'm a resident of the 2nd District. I think the last comment you made about the possibility of rapid change in the wealth gap is one that I am actually very passionate about. I think what you're really talking about in some form is reparations and an actual address to the financial difficulties that being in America and a descendant of those that were enslaved and all that has come prior to that, whatever you're going to call it, it would be some type of reparations. What would that look like to you?
Yeah, so, in law, I end the book to talk about reparations. It looks like justice, right? And when we have, as Dennis knows very well, or Mr. Dennis, complex litigations, when we tried, we have class actions, some group of people have been wronged, there's been a contract that's been breached. And as Martin Luther King said at the steps of the Capitol, there has been a debt defaulted. We refuse to believe that the banks of justice are defaulted, right? Are bankrupt. And they were here to cash a bad check. Like that idea of reparations goes back to justice, okay? And we never ask, it's so complicated. How do we compensate, the victims of 9/11? How do we compensate? The legal system, if it knows anything, it knows how to do that. We know how to compensate people. We know how to calculate damages. And every time it becomes a problem, it's because of reparations. You know who got reparations? Is the slave owners got reparations for their lost property. The French have been getting reparations from Haiti for their lost slaves for 200 years. We know how to do reparations. It's just that we refuse. And yes, so I think it can be changed quickly. I think to do reparations, there's got to be a shift in thought. I think there's got to be a waking up to the fact that injustice is actually, King said it, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Justice is not a finite quality. When it's finite, it's not justice. So when certain communities don't have justice, we do not live in a just world. And I think we all understand that deep down.
She's over here preaching. Thank you. My name is Tay Thompson. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit that provides financial literacy workshops and services for foster youth around the county. And in coming to this discussion, this panel, it's enlightened me to ensure that we're teaching young people about the insidiousness of these harmful structures that exist, in addition to the basics of being able to learn how to manage their money. And so my question to you is that in what efforts should myself and other nonprofit leaders and folks in the community do to ensure that the next generation is coming to know about what's happened in the past and also know how to navigate and structure and prepare for what's to come in the future regarding their wealth?
I'll try. It's a very profound question to ask. Little background on me. My mom was a single parent, and she kept a budget in a notebook at all times. And she knew exactly how much money we had as a family at all times. And so, not to say I learned all those lessons, because I'm not as frugal as she was, but I knew and learned that you have to live within your means and continue to grow. She certainly preached that to me all throughout our lives. I really honestly believe she was secretly rich because we never had money for anything. My wife runs a nonprofit as well. It's a little different than what you described, but at its base, it has the same principle. She actually grew up in New York and Long Island and grew up, and she's a figure skater. And I know maybe some people are saying, oh, he's married to a white lady. No, she's black.
What's she doing on that ice?
She's a curvy figure skater.
And she was really good. She went to the Junior Olympics.
You're on point. Let's go. Let's go.
Anyway, my point being is that she runs a program called Unity Ice Academy that provides a summer camp to inner city kids in Compton, Long Beach, Lakewood, out of the Lakewood rinks, where she teaches them how to skate, and it's free. Supervisor Mitchell wrote a letter to the various people, the Anaheim Ducks and others, about this good work it was doing. And what is that program about? Is it really about skating? No, it's about self-responsibility. It's about knowing that you can achieve. It's about dedication, it's about commitment, it's about all those things. financial commitment, financial restraint, with the knowledge that despite the fact there are many obstacles for you to overcome, if you continue to strive in a managed, responsible way, you can achieve the American dream: home ownership and freedom. And I think that's the message we have to tell our kids when we tell them how bad it is. I heard that Professor Baradaran actually at one point in time was at Harvard, and there was a famous professor there named Derek Bell who taught a class called Race, Law, and Change. And Derek Bell actually gave the commencement address when I was at Howard for our class. And it was very sobering, I must admit. He talked about Sisyphus, the Greek figure who was doomed to push a rock up the hill only to have it roll back down, and he had to just keep pushing it back up the hill. Well, being black in America is a Sisyphean task.
Come on now.
We gotta keep pushing that rock. And you're gonna have to somehow make that attractive to all these young kids, so that they believe in their heart that somebody behind them is going to reach the mountain. I agree with the professor. It doesn't take 228 years to bridge the gap. It just takes a bunch of committed people to change the justice.
Yeah.
If we get a fair start, if we restart the race even, we'll do just fine. Yeah. The laws can do that through injunctive relief, through giving damages for past wrongs. But again, it can't do it all. It takes good people like you to write to Supervisor Mitchell. She's probably not happy I'm telling her that. Putting work on her staff, but your congressperson to continue to believe, to get out and vote, do all those things so that our structures are created in a more fair way so that we continue to progress. It's action, brother.
Yeah.
Tell those people to be active, be disruptive, be loud, and stomp out and fight discrimination, racism, every corner, every step of the way, every chance they get, and believe that they will succeed.
The other part of that, just the practical piece as well, you're teaching those tools, but the history part is important, right? So when you walk into the car dealership, they've learned all the lessons that you've taught them through your program. You have to remind them that the interest rate that they're offering you may not be the one that you really are qualified for. So what should you do? You should do some work before you go into that car dealership. See about your credit union and get you approved for a loan and see what interest rate they're going to offer you. You might have all your money ready to buy the car. Talk to the car dealer to say, yes, I'm going to finance it, because you know a car dealer is either going to get you a lower price because they think they're going to make money off you on the interest rate, or, right, like, are you actually fine? So they can tell them you're going to finance the car, but you got your money to pay it off on the first payment, right? It is those things that with a practical skepticism, that when you walk into any kind of transaction, to be educated on your own and know your history, know who you're dealing with. If you're walking into Wells Fargo Bank, know who you're dealing with, right? Like those pieces. So you can't just know the tools, you gotta know your history as well. Yeah. One question over here.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Trishaw Marie Williams. I am a commissioner and a CPA. One of the systems that you mentioned was the risk-based system and how risk is even assessed. I'm hyper aware of how this system is used just as a financial statement auditor, as a profession. Are you aware of any alternative models to how risk is assessed that are not so individualistically based as, they are now to more collectively based, risk-based models?
Yeah. Okay. I have several answers to this. One is, it's like the holy grail, I think, to do underwriting without getting race involved in it, because right now you can use literally any proxy and race will be underneath it. So you can use a zip code, you can use whatever. You know, what you want to get at an individual underwriting level is, what is this person's past? You know, have they shown that they can pay back their rent, their whatever? So collecting more data is always good. But in this world of data collection and the people who are collecting it, I hesitate to say more data, because then you're in the surveillance state. At a general level, though, I think risk is one of these things that has been so tied into race that risk, just like wealth, I say in the book that wealth is sort of where the seeds of past injustice bloom today, right? So you can look at the different risk rates, and if you look at them straight up, you're like, well, you're a risky borrower. But you need the context to say, well, you have no buffer. If your grandparents or your parents didn't have an FHA loan, if you don't have a basement to go to, if you don't have a $10,000 loan, let alone $1 million loan to start your business, if you don't have those parental wealth inputs or grandparental wealth inputs, then you're high risk. If you're a black person in this country, your risk levels are going to be higher. So even if you say, well, take out the race from it, the risk is still going to show, but that's where race lives also. So I think getting away from that into more community-centered, more, the way that banking used to be is you kind of met with somebody and you said, do I trust this person? Is this person trustworthy? Are they not trustworthy? So black banks did this and do this. So there is a role to be played for the community banker that is out here. But in this modern economy where everything is digitized, it's much harder to do that. But that's a way, you know, like we have old school methodologies for doing risk. They're like our bodies, our eyes, like we are honed as a species to understand people and their trustworthiness, and we're not really using that in the financial sector for a purpose, I think.
Can I just add a point to that real quick, Fredericka? Because I actually
my staff is giving me the eagle eye, which is a rarity.
I'm gonna do this in 90 seconds. Okay. All right. So Jennifer, my case is really about credit risk classification. Wells Fargo used a AI model called their enhanced credit scoring model that is really a form of machine learning. It uses an algorithm that has a number of inputs into it that actually deems you and evaluates your risk potential, and they categorize you into 4 categories: A1, A2, meaning generally okay, C1, C2, meaning generally bad. What we found out was that an enhanced credit scoring model, it systematically downgraded minorities and blacks in particular. They knew it. Yeah. They actually had a document that says that there's disparate impact caused by the use of these criteria. They knew the proxies. It was past due accounts, it was length of time in file, and it was number of inquiries. Okay? Those 3 things showed to be proxies for race. Well, it's obvious, right? Listen, you could be my credit score at one time must have been in the 5s, something like that, 500. Now it's 800, but that's what it took to hustle through college, get through, get done playing football, not make the Rams, get cut, you know. I mean, it's 30 years, I'm almost over it. Not yet.
He's not bitter. He's not bitter at all.
And so all of those things, I had all kinds of that, right? But now it's good, right? So you have to have models that look at the person and look at their current history, their current credit profile. And what Wells Fargo was not doing, it was not looking at the current profile of the people that are applying to them. They were instead using 12 inputs as part of their enhanced credit scoring model. They actually had overlays of nearly 4,000 different criteria, one of which was whether or not you had a neighborhood watch program. And if you had a neighborhood watch program, that was bad.
All right, you told me that was going to be short. Okay, so Kalila told me 2 minutes, but Kalila, I have this one gentleman that has been standing there, so I'm going to take Only one more question, or am I taking 2 questions? Okay, 2 questions. All right, here we go.
And I'll make up time. Yeah. Yes, this is, my name is Oliver Bowie, and I'm a local pastor here. And one, I'd like to thank Supervisor Holly Mitchell, her staff, and all of you, and our guests for coming. One of the things that I would say, I'm pretty savvy in the financial world, but one of the things that you brought out, Professor, was the importance of laws. A lot of times we think about money, but how important laws matter, how important voting matters, because that's going to play a very important role for, and our community needs to understand that. And I stand here wanting to maybe possibly hear some solutions, because we tend to spend time on the problem as we move forward. And also I know that the church, that's about the only or most stable institution that we have in our community that stood strong, and how as the church can need to get involved and be a big part of moving this agenda forward. And also the laws that's in place, we're not going to be able to move forward if we continue on this same system with its same practices. And I think it's important that we understand too, we have to change as well, because unfortunately many of our leaders that look like me tend to put the same practices in place too. And so we're not going to have no change as long as they play by those rules and follow the same practices.
Well, before the professor gets to that, I'm going to quote the Honorable Holly J. Mitchell. Elections matter, right? And we can say that we did want to be solution-based here. The solutions at this point has to do with individual behavior that is not going to change the structure, because elections matter. Donald Trump was sworn into office on Monday. He likes to deregulate. Deregulation is what precipitated the 2008 Great Depression, right? So you are right, those laws and those elections play into that. So we are not going to change who's going to be our president for the next 4 years. So you have to ask yourself then at individual level, can my church provide collateral, affordable housing, or any of those type of things to help the community in this space in which we find ourselves? And other than that, until we get to a place where we elect someone into all levels of government that are proactively changing laws and changing the paradigm in which we find ourselves in, that switch that Professor talked about is not going to happen. So don't forget the offenses of somebody that happened a year ago, and you like, oh yeah, I kind of know that name, and you forgot everything, the offenses this person just did. Elections matter.
And I would say too as well, Pastor, is that, you know, Matthew 6:33 and 34 says, seek thee first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be dealt unto me. You know, don't worry about tomorrow. Let the problems of today suffice. So through the church, we all can coalesce, come together, and have different types of activities that help the advancement of everybody, right? Black churches back in the day had investment clubs. They did those kind of things, and that is still a role, at least in my view, in the community. Now, this isn't me really as a lawyer talking about it. It's just a kid that was raised Baptist in San Diego and went to a Baptist church. But the viewpoint that I would say about all of this is that there's an important role for everybody in the community as we build these communities. And your role is pretty important too, to make sure your parishioners understand the power that they have to speak their voice, to hold people accountable. You know, Second Baptist in San Francisco, when we were going to have a press conference about our case, they was going to show up and show out.
All right. Hey, thank you.
Last question.
Good afternoon, and I'm glad to be here. My name is Joanne Russell, and my organization is Let's Make It Happen. And I'd like to thank the professor, because what we do, one of the things we do, is we use data to inform the community of the things that's going on so they can choose what to do about it. And in your book, it does talk about how so many of African Americans are unbanked. And the problem that I see that I'm trying to come against and find solutions on is one of the reasons we're unbanked is because we've been locked out of the system because of check systems. When we got to a point and people, and that is one of the most difficult things to overcome and correct. Do you see anything, or are there methods so people can? Because they're forced now into using these little check systems over here, check systems over there, these phone things, and they can't really do business like you need to in this digital economy, and it's costing us dearly.
Yeah, so I'm working right now on a pilot in Chicago for using postal banks. In my first book, I kind of offered that as a solution. It's taken 10 years, but we're using postal banks to offer free bank accounts, guaranteed, full on, no, not a prepaid debit card, no fees, and we're trying to do that. Once we get it done in Chicago, we can do it in LA, but there are places. My answer to the church question was, one of the most effective things I saw in Georgia when I was there for 10 years is churches would, there's a rhythm to payday loans where people get stuck. So, payday loans are, it's like 300% APR, but usually around Christmas time is when a lot of the gas prices go up, and then families have more expenses, so you get a payday loan, but then you can't pay it for a couple years. So what churches started doing, one in particular did it very well, is just a pool of funds to lend out interest-free loans. So you bring it back, you put it back in the fund, but these basic solutions to people, bank accounts, you could do a bank account drive, right? It's more just, documentation and whatever. This is the thing with Wells Fargo and Chase, they're not actually offering free bank accounts, but if you partner with a bank, One United here in Los Angeles is a black-owned bank, they will do deposit accounts for free. If a church or any community does it together, they maybe require like a financial literacy class or two. But those are very basic level things that save people, something like $3,000 an unbanked family pays to just cash their checks. And these are people that are below poverty level, right? And so, and they have good credit. They're, a lot of times it's not a problem until check systems or whatever kicks them out of the system. So I would say focus on practical solutions, because the laws aren't changing on that at all in the next 4 years.
Thank you all for joining us. We are going to have our staff please join us at our resource fair